This week saw warnings from the US's biggest banks. JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon says that the US bond market will crack under rising debt. His comments echo similar sentiments from the president of Goldman Sachs, John Waldron. Now, President Trump's mega bill is expected to see US debt skyrocket. The bill awaits Senate approval, where many Republicans have reservations on voting in favor of it. Let's get you more on this and the global repercussions of Trump's trade policy. I am joined by world-renowned economist Jeffrey Sachs for an exclusive interview. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Sachs, for joining us here on Washington Watch. Appreciate your time. Professor Sachs, President Trump's key reason for his trade policy is the world has taken advantage of the US. He points to various trade deficits, for example, with India. He thinks it's high time for a level playing field. Now, you've likened the approach to Mickey Mouse country. Why do you say that?
I said that the interpretation of trade deficits is a bit Mickey Mouse, meaning that it is dramatically wrong and oversimplified to the point of being ridiculous. Trade deficits occur when countries in the aggregate spend more than they produce. This is an identity, we say in economics. In other words, it's a precise definition of what we mean by a comprehensive trade deficit, which we measure as a country's current account deficit. The fact of the matter is the United States spends more than it produces. And the main reason for that is our chronic large budget deficit. In fact, our government acts as a kind of credit card for the nation. The government borrows at relatively low cost, or it used to borrow at relatively low cost, and then it would make transfers of income back to the population through various programs. And it's been doing that for more than 2 decades, and the debt has accumulated dramatically of the government. And the counterpart of that is massive spending on foreign goods. So we've had current account deficits alongside budget deficits. If President Trump is serious about wanting to reduce the external deficit, he needs to cut the internal deficit. Or to put it another way, if he wants to get these trade deficits down, he has to get the budget deficit down. But he seems intent on not doing that. He wants more tax cuts for his favored recipients, larger military spending, continued large deficits. So we'll have continued large trade deficits as well.
Right. Let's talk about that trade deficit. Now, one of many countries trying to strike a deal with the US is India. Some news reports suggesting that New Delhi has actually toughened its stance as it works to strike a deal more favorable to India. Now, you've said do not allow Trump to play India. How much leverage, though, do you think India really has at this juncture, given that the US is its largest trading partner?
Well, the first point I would say about the U.S. economy is that it is large, but not a dominant or overwhelming part of the world economy, and a large but not dominant part of the U.S. The world demand for exports, whether from India or any other country. So I think the tariffs are harmful to India as they are also to other countries and to the United States. So I don't think that they're insignificant, but I would not let a national policy be overwhelmed by them. India has lots of potential trading partners. It has lots of markets worldwide. It's part of the BRICS, which is a very important and significant group of countries. I do believe India should join RCEP also, the next door neighbor free trade area that includes China, Japan, Korea, the 10 ASEAN countries, Australia, and New Zealand. If India were part of that, India's trade would be more assured, and India would find that it has a market of more than 2 billion people next door, in which it's well engaged. So I think India has other alternatives and should not do somersaults to try to satisfy the United States. In particular, it should not discriminate against its other trade partners. It should not make concessions to the United States that undermine the most favored nation principle of international trade. That is, that India is bound to give most favored nation trade status to all of its counterpart trading partners that are in the World Trade Organization. The United States should not break that basic principle of international trade because then we devolve into a game of favorites, into an endless round of negotiations and bilateral negotiations numbering in the thousands. So this would be terrible rather than having a world trading system. India should watch itself so that it doesn't get sucked into the U.S. game.
Right. Professor Sachs, let's get back to the U.S. The Fed, in its latest minutes of their meeting, have warned of increasing recession risk. The U.S., as you know, has seen recessions before. What do you, though, see different this time around as far as the impact on the rest of the world goes?
Well, first, we're having a self-inflicted recession or economic crisis. The economy was not heading for a downturn before all of the uncertainties and instabilities of recent weeks took hold. These are uncertainties that are causing the Fed and private forecasters to revise their estimates. They've also caused a downturn, albeit with ups and downs, in consumer sentiment. There's just a tremendous amount of uncertainty. And that uncertainty is largely self-inflicted. We can't seem to have a rational economic policy that rationally examines where an economy should head, and in particular to digital and green technologies, that is low carbon. The U.S. has abandoned the low carbon road at the federal level of this administration, so we don't even know which direction to go because Trump has pulled the U.S. once again out of the Paris Climate Agreement and has downplayed structural transformation that's needed. And then comes the tariff disruptions of world trade, and now comes a budget policy that is, I guess, in Elon Musk's words, a monstrosity. And so this is our problem. We're making a mess of things internally. Here you have the richest economy in the world, but it just can't behave in a rational way.
Right, Professor Sachs, now Trump's mega bill is facing some opposition from Republican senators, not just Elon Musk, who, as we know, has been unrelenting, not mincing his words, especially in the past 24 hours. The bill is forecast at $2.4 trillion, some say over that as well, in debt over the next decade. If you could simply explain why this is such a huge problem for ordinary Americans.
Basically, there is no agreement in the United States about what the government should do and how it should pay for what it does. And the result is that we have a chronic situation where the government at the federal level takes in about 16% of gross domestic product and spends 22 or 23% of gross domestic product. That gap is our deficit of about 6 to 7% of GDP, and that deficit is financed by selling government debt, U.S. Treasury bills and bonds. That debt is rising sharply. We have a mountain of debt that has accumulated that is now about 100% of our national income. That means that as interest rates rise, the interest bill on this debt is now around 3% of our gross domestic product, and it will continue to rise because interest rates themselves are now rising, certainly at the long-term end, to above 5% 5 percentage points, I should say, 5% per year yields. So we have a mountain of debt, a rising debt, rising interest rates on that debt, and this stretches out for decades to come on the current policy scenario. Our Congressional Budget Office projects that the debt will rise to above 150% of GDP. Well, what does that mean? It has many implications. One is financial instability. Governments with such large debts are unstable, and that is why Moody's just downgraded the U.S. credit rating by one notch, one step. That means higher borrowing costs, and that can lead to a vicious spiral where the borrowing costs rise. That exacerbates the deficits because you have to pay interest on this mountain of debt, and that leads to a spiral of instability.
Jeffrey Sachs, thank you very much indeed for your time here on Washington Watch, that exclusive interview with us here on NDTV.